welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake LaMore, and this episode drops in Black History Month of 2024, and we're continuing to celebrate with the Kankakee County Museum, who we actually have here every month. If you didn't know that, they always drop by, and we talk about something very fascinating in our county's history. We're once again joined by Jory Walters and Jack Klasey. Welcome.
Always happy to be here.
Yes, always happy to see you here too. So we are gonna just do a slice, which is what we always do, right? A slice of things, because there's so many things to talk about, and some topics could go on forever. Some are just short and sweet. Some are in the middle. But today we are focusing on
essentially Black history of the community, and with most of the emphasis on Pembroke Township.
Where does it begin?
Mm-hmm. Actually, Pembroke is very unusual because, among other things, it is the largest township of the 17 townships in Kankakee County, and also the youngest. It was formed on February 17th, 1877, out of parts of Momence and St. Anne townships. And so it filled in the space down there that previously was part of the others. It also is different from most of the rest of the county in terms of the land.
Isn't it sandy?
It's very
right?
sandy and is relatively poor soil compared to the really deep, rich soils out in the western part of the county and the central part of the county. It's I think a leftover from the Ice Age, where that would have been the shoreline, perhaps, of one of the huge lakes from the melting glaciers that covered this area.
Yeah, it's like that was kind of like the edge,
right?
The edge of that glacier. Yeah,
because like some of the moraines up around Chicago, for example, that were similar to that.
Yeah.
As a result, the relatively poor soil, there's a fair amount of wooded area there too, but as a result of the poor soil, the earliest owners of Pembroke Township land, which were at that time primarily white, and a lot of them were good-sized farmers. They owned a lot of land here and there. They grazed cattle. So it was a definitely grazing land because of the nature of it. And the major crop was hay, Timothy hay, I think it was called, a certain type of hay that was gathered and baled up and sold into the Chicago market infrequently. Even, in fact, in 1890 and 1891, the hay crop was celebrated in Momence. They built these fantastic structure called the Momence Hay Palace.
That's right. We talked about that. I remember one time a long time ago. But yeah, they made like a few different castles.
Yeah,
right.
The first one in 1890 was very good sized. It was built out of hay bales and so forth. Had parapets and towers, and people could come in and tour it, and they had lectures and performances and musical performance there. And they built one even bigger and better one in 1891, but then it died out after that.
Right, and those bales came from Pembroke?
Yes, they would, because Pembroke was the primary. There was hay raised elsewhere in the county, but in terms of volume, Pembroke was the championship. And also in a later period, much later period, World War II, Pembroke was the primary grower of another type of crop, hemp. Today, of course, we think of hemp in terms of marijuana and so forth, but during World War II, and this is when they were the huge producer of hemp, hemp was used for so many products in the wartime, cordage for ropes and things of this sort, and various other products, and they were believed to be either the largest or the second largest area in the country growing that crop.
I had no idea.
Anyway, we've talked about place. Now I suppose we ought to talk about people.
Yeah, right. And I know one thing, maybe I don't know if you were going to mention this later on. You probably were going to mention this. I remember at one point, unless I'm getting mixed up, in World War II, it was either during World War II or after or before, there was something about an airport or an air base.
No, in the 1920s, there was a proposal, and actually I think they built one building and so forth at that time, there was a lot of fervor for building airports because aviation was new and very attractive and so forth. And there was a company that bought a pretty good chunk of land in Pembroke Township, which was going to be an airport and an aircraft manufacturing company.
That's what it was.
And it lasted a couple of years. They never built any planes, but the product, they did some work. They built one building at least. And then somehow something happened. I think what happened may have been the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And so eventually the property was broken up into smaller parcels and sold off.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so there have been some interesting oddities relating to...
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. Yeah, but continuing on, you were saying, we talk about the people there that settled there.
Yeah, and actually the earliest family name that we were able to find, I think, was Walden. In 1852, Amos and Margaret Walden settled in, actually they were not in Kankakee County, they settled in what it was that time Iroquois County, and it still is, just north of Beaverville. And they had come from somewhere out further to the east, and apparently either were escaped slaves or freedmen and women. There was no indication of which they were, but according to one of the histories we were reading, they were actually a mixed race. They were part Black and part Potawatomi Indian.
Oh, wow.
So, and we don't have much detail on them at all, other than some of their descendants later lived in Kankakee. But as far as the sort of official first settler of the county, I think Jory could probably talk about them.
The Tedder family. And I will mention we have an African-American exhibit at the museum. And we have hosted kind of like this. We have the whole family tree.
Oh,
and you
the
can
Tedder.
see the whole, yeah.
That's the Tedder family tree right there. Okay.
Too small and too unreadable on this, but we have it bigger. And we have that family, and we have a whole exhibit on the African-American experience in Kankakee. And if anybody wants to do research, I have an entire box on African-American history.
It's a huge file.
Huge box filled to the brim of materials for African-American history.
Primarily newspaper clippings and documents.
This is one, this is from 1972 of an article by Virginia Porter. Virginia Porter of the experience, African-American experience, and it's one of five. I think five. And we have all five of them. We have the entire series of continuous articles. If anybody is interested in reading it, I have had people come and talk specifically about this and want to see it. So we do have it available. And I have read through the whole thing, and very interesting.
Yeah.
Virginia Porter is interesting. She was the first African-American reporter at the Journal.
Oh, that's cool.
And in what year was the series? I don't recall.
I thought you said
1972, it looks like.
1970. Okay. She researched a 5-part series in which she touched on as much as she was able to determine the history of the African-American families and development in Kankakee County. She paid a lot of attention, which is probably likely, to genealogy, to family names, because she cites dozens of different family names at different periods, a lot of whom were interrelated because there was a relatively small population in the earlier years of Pembroke Township, and so the families tended to intermarry with each other. So, so-and-so was so-and-so's third uncle or something like this. And so she has the names of a lot of the families, like the Greenleys and Tall And some that you still hear today. I think Tyler Tull, who was a alderman in Kankakee, or was one, is a descendant of one of the early families in Pembroke.
Well, and
there's also the Tedders are still around.
Right, we were just talking about the Tedders. There was a Tedder alderman,
right,
and not too long ago, right? Is he still alive, or did he pass away? I can't remember.
I honestly can't remember.
But what is significant though about the Tedder family in Pembroke? Is it just they just kind of took the reins and were part of the building of it, or what made the Tedders so primary in Pembroke?
They were essentially the first settler of what is now Pembroke Township, first black settler. They came in 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War. And I've never seen any indication one way or the other of they came there in a wagon, he and his wife, with their 18 children.
18 children?
Yes. And they came originally from Ohio, but Matthew Tedder was, we don't know where Mary Eliza, his wife, was born, but Matthew Tedder was born in North Carolina. And I haven't seen any indication whether they were, the two of them, and of course later the descendants, had escaped from slavery, or whether they had, because 63 occasionally had, or frequently had, freed black men and women, or those who had even never been enslaved, although that was very, very rare.
Yeah.
But they apparently, from wherever they began in the South, ended up in Ohio, and then came to Kankakee County. 7 of those 18 children died of diphtheria in the first year they were here. It's a very tragic story in that sense. There was also another, I think they might have been related, but it was a little hard to tell. At the same time that the Tedders settled, and I believe he ended up buying 42 acres of farmland there, so he was the first black farmer as well in what became a rural farmers' township. Anyway, the other settlers that came with them or arrived about at the same time were a brother and sister, John Morgan and his sister Sarah. And the Morgan name is another one that turns up frequently is in there.
Yeah.
Have you touched on the Underground Railway area?
Oh, yes. I have had in the past, actually recently too.
Speaking of escaped slaves.
Yeah.
The question of, did Kankakee County anywhere, or in particular Hopkins Park, Pembroke, was there any stops on the Underground Railroad? Well, in our archives, I have literally one piece of information that says yes, not much detail, and one piece that says no. Yes, no. So I can't say for sure if there was somebody, I think, came to me and said they think their property was in Hopkins Park was part of it, and I would tend to believe at least, yes, there might have been probably at least one location. But like I said, I can't prove that in
there's nothing, right, there's no hard evidence that depicts, says yes. And you think about it, specifically for Pembroke, the township didn't exist yet. Right,
it was part of St. Anne Township, Moments Township,
right? During the Underground Railroad days, so it's more of just a question. Did they pass through the county at all? And I mean, if you think about it, I mean, whether there was a stop here or not, they probably did, because a lot of them went to Chicago, right?
To north, right, and to the Canadian border in many cases,
right?
Secret stop or just stopped in the open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Traditionally, there are at least 2 or 3 probably known stops. One is Wilmington. There's another with no particular location that I've read about, that's somewhere in the vicinity of Rock Creek or the state park. And then they're also in the south suburbs. I think in South Holland, there was what's now South Holland, there was a Dutch farmer who was an abolitionist who, his farm was a way station. I've forgotten the name, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we have, as Jory said, one says yes, one says no. We haven't got any firm.
It would make sense in Pembroke since there was not a lot of people.
There's nothing.
That would
was the
that would
least
make sense to have it there.
The county.
Right.
Who's going to find? Who's going
to find him out?
No. Yeah. So, I personally, as a researcher historian, I would probably say it is likely, but I cannot say positively.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I always like to go on what I can find in writing as opposed to
like it's maybe not.
It's kind of like the legal system in Scotland where you had 3 possible verdicts in a case. Guilty, not guilty, not proven.
Yeah.
So I think not proven
is probably where we're at.
Likely, yes. Proven, no. Actually, I have called a few places in the state who do research on these stops, and they said they haven't done our area yet. So I think it's still a research that is ongoing to try to uncover.
What else do we know about the Tedder family?
They were helped to populate the county. Obviously, a lot of their descendants and collateral descendants. Interesting, even as early or as late as 1870, let's say. One source that said that the settlers, the black population of the county, didn't pass 100 people until the 1890 census. And back as early as 1870, in addition to the Tedders and the Morgans, there were 3 other families that are believed to have been there. Hannigans, the Wheatleys, and the Slowtracks. Slowtracks eventually migrated to Kankakee. And there's an interesting story about that.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Alex Slowtrack was, I believe he had been a freedman, but he'd lived in the Kankakee area for quite a long time, before the Civil or after the Civil War. In 1870, on February 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, and that gave African Americans the right to vote. African American women and white Caucasian women still didn't have the right to vote. They had a long way to go before they
Yes, they did.
But anyway, to celebrate the passage of this, Leroy Payne, who was one of the major livery stables in town, broke out his finest rig and so forth, and one of his drivers drove Alex Slowtrack around town. Mr. Slowtrack. I'm trouble. I had seen one representation that I think was a typo. They called him Snowtrack. So every once in a while, I revert instead of saying it.
Yeah.
Anyway, Alex Slowtrack was driven around town, smoking a big cigar, and waving to pedestrians who were responding to him all downtown. Thomas Bonfield, who was a famous local lawyer and one-time mayor of the city, said about that, and who knew, of course, these people, all the people, said this was all to show the public that they were on a political equality with the white man. And I know that I don't know if the Slowtrack name has survived up this far, but I know for quite a long time.
I've never heard it until now.
Considered to be, among the earliest settlers of this area.
Yeah.
As far as the city of Kankakee, the initial area, stepping back, in about the 1900 census, I did some research at one point as part of the first Black Heritage exhibit we had that located where all of the African-American individuals and families lived in Kankakee in 1900. And there were only somewhere around maybe 100 or 110 individuals, or total family, 110 people. And they were scattered all over town. There was no specific area. A little later than that, one area where there was a concentration of black workers, mostly men, was on the south side of the river. If you know where the Aqua, Illinois building is,
yes,
the quarry behind that was the Illinois Central Quarry, the Sinclair Quarry, and most of the workers at the quarry were black. And they lived in a couple of rooming houses that were just north of that quarry. And later on, the concentration of African American families and individuals, and later on being, in this case, probably 1910, 1920, was just north of that. The section of the south of what's now the Schuyler Avenue Bridge, and east of Schuyler Avenue. So, and there to the quarry. So that whole section along the river, north of the State Hospital, and back to Schuyler Avenue, was mostly the first organized African American church, AME Zion Methodist Church,
was also in that neighborhood.
Was built there, yes.
Okay.
And I think that I don't know what church occupies that area right now. I know there is one, but I can't think of the name.
Mm-hmm.
So, and later, of course, and this was mostly after, during and after World War II, as continuing immigration came to this area, the shift in where most black residents were congregated was north of Kankakee, north of Court Street, and roughly west of Hobby Avenue. And
I couldn't think of the name of the street.
Yes.
That's what I was sitting here trying to think. I could see the location in my head, but I can't think of the name of the street.
Yeah. And is that the period of time for the African Americans in the United States? Was that the period of time they called the Great Migration?
Great Migration, well,
right?
The Great Migration is typically thought of, at least as far as the sources I've seen, as approximately 1910 to the 1970s.
Oh, it's that? I didn't know it was that.
Yeah, you had, right after the Civil War, of course, you had, maybe a decade or so after that, you had a fairly large migration northward to Midwestern and East Coast cities, New York, Chicago, the bigger population centers, probably because of two reasons. One, and that would include the Depression years as well, for example. Between 1910 and 1940, most of the people that were coming north from there, most of the African American people, although there were Caucasians that came north for the same reasons. One, in the case of African Americans, to escape the oppression of the Jim Crow restrictions and laws in the South, and because there were jobs north, especially World War I. There was there were factory jobs available and so forth. And then, of course, once they were in the Depression, that kind of quieted things down, but people still came north if they could. At times, I've heard the Illinois Central Railroad referred to as the Overground Railway because a lot of people coming out of the South.
Yes.
Most of the jobs available to African Americans at that time were, of course, domestic servants, porters in hotels, menial jobs, but at least they were jobs, working in livery stables. In that 1900 census that I mentioned, they, of course, gave I think of all of the people that were listed there was one listed as a teacher, and she taught in Moments, I believe, somewhere. But most of the rest of the people, of course, had what we would call entry level or minimal jobs today.
Yeah.
The second wave of the Great Migration took place, especially during World War II, and especially because of all the war plants going on. There was a lot of jobs available. There also, that particular aspect of the migration also included not just the Midwest and the East, but California and Arizona and other places, primarily where there were factory jobs and war-related jobs. Interesting, too, I think that the direct migration to Kankakee County, to Pembroke and to the city of Kankakee, during most of that period, especially the later part of the period, was actually much smaller than the remigration from Chicago.
Oh.
People coming back south again.
Yeah.
For a particularly good reason. One of it was because of problems with crowding. Not overtly, but otherwise, a lot of the same problems they've had with the Jim Crow regulations in the South. Obviously, discrimination in housing and jobs and so forth, but also crime. People with families wanted to get out of there, and I think they did. So they would come to Pembroke, where there were small farms, small lots. Especially after World War II, there was a lot of promotion of sale of small lots, which, since quite a few of these families had agricultural or rural backgrounds, they were able to have a subsistence farm for their own families and so forth. And so even though the soil is not very great there, it could support it would not support large-scale commercial farming, but for an individual family farm with a few acres, you would be able to raise some livestock and a lot of food crop and so forth.
Yeah, and they could have their own little community away from the oppression and all that, in a what they felt was a safe.
Yeah, Hopkins Park was not the south side of Chicago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I grew up on the south side of Chicago.
Right. I was like, you know all about it. Yeah.
There's something I want to add, not Kankakee specific, but general African American history. When I was doing research for Capone and that period, the gangsters, and watching documentaries, I watched a lot of documentaries on the mafia and and all that. But one thing that was really interesting to me was when Capone and people like that had nightclubs, and they hired singers and musical
speakeasies
with music, people who did instruments. They hired a lot of African American people to sing and to do the saxophone and the big band instruments, and they were very protective of the Black community, because they said, well, we don't care what color you are, you're great musicians, we want to hire you. And so they really got the musical influence of jazz and music in general really came about in relation to the mob bosses.
Yeah, the bootleggers were supporting him.
Yes,
who was really, didn't really care about the laws of discrimination, and like, no, we don't care about any of that. We want you to be your best and to sing and to do your instruments. Of course, we have a lot of famous Black people who did a lot of famous instruments.
Yes.
Who went on to be really famous, but a lot of them got their start in these nightclubs,
in the speakeasies,
and really went on to do good things.
Yeah.
And Al Capone actually said some of them, like one particular, I think, person went to another club and couldn't get in, and Capone said, "Wait a minute here." So he did a lot of, things for the African American community, because he saw their talent. He saw the discrimination, and he saw their talent and how they could be very, given a chance. They could do good things. I thought that was great. PR and and a great way to get people to, look differently about the race relations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I never really thought about that until you brought it up, but yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah.
Well, they did bad things as far as bootlegging, but good things to come out of it.
Well, it's just like, they went to church every Sunday, right?
That's right.
Right. So, the only people that lost out in Prohibition was the federal government
They
for all
really
that tax money.
think about all that tax money. They spent it on G-men instead, right?
That's right.
Because the booze came no matter what.
Yeah.
But, so I just wanted to make that point of that aspect that is so often overlooked.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah.
Speaking of the mob and so forth, and Prohibition, I ran across not too long ago, I think it's in the 1930s, obviously, a clipping on a federal raid on a barn in Pembroke, which was they discovered was one of the largest distilleries that they'd ever found in the state of Illinois.
Oh my gosh.
Which they, of course, reduced to rubble as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Yeah.
But of course, distilleries and things like that were all over the place, too. There was one in a barn in Bourbonnais that I remember. In fact, Nell Clark's son, I believe it was one of the people who was arrested.
Oh, of course. I mean, she had her whole family in on that, right? Because
That's right.
her daughter ended up doing the same work she did, correct?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But remember that Pembroke was in the faraway area
it's a
where
perfect
not
place.
a lot of people. The mob had a great time doing stuff down yonder,
Yeah.
and got away with it,
including
because,
leaving corpses on roadsides.
exactly.
Sure.
Yep.
I mean, there's nothing out there. Not many people are traveling those roads because
That's
the
right.
roads aren't very good.
No.
It's not pavement, like it is in the city.
Yeah, and these
the
are
town.
an isolated area.
Mm-hmm.
The population was relatively small. I think, trying to think of the highest figure that I saw anywhere for population of Pembroke was like 7,000 people, but I wasn't able to check that in the actual census figures. The most current census, the most recent census, I believe, was something like 2,500 people in all of this large area. Kind of like Iroquois County. It's very lightly populated.
It's very lightly
size.
populated, and I know from just the different people I've talked to that either lived in Pembroke or Hopkins Park, in that area, they've all kind of told me that the population has dwindled.
Been declining.
It has
steadily.
declined. It's not as populated as it once was. I don't know if that's changing now as of recent, but it didn't. It seemed like a lot of people had kind of spread out and moved.
Yeah,
As a lot of areas like that have done over the years, right?
Yeah, the movement back from Chicago and coming from elsewhere into Pembroke pretty much peaked, I think, or was surpassed in more recent years by people leaving Pembroke and moving to Kankakee or other urban areas, again, primarily because of housing, living conditions, ability to find jobs or other forms of income. And, it's
I wouldn't be surprised if it peaked in maybe the 1980s.
probably so, yeah. And now it's just sort of stabilizing. And then let's see what the next census, of course, we've got 6 years till the next census.
Right. Yeah.
There are a lot of changes. And of course, one of the problems in, first of all, being fairly lightly populated, but also because of the poverty level and so forth, is have been essentially few or no jobs available within Hopkins or within Pembroke. I think there was a Nestle factory of some sort there. I think there was a casket factory at one time. There was the abortive plan that Governor Ryan had to put a woman's prison there that
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was would have been a very large employer.
That's right. I forgot about
but
that.
It got beaten down in the state legislature somewhere.
Yeah.
So, and even, what we would call necessities of life, or grocery stores.
Yeah.
I think, it was a long way to a grocery store. I don't know whether there were any in Hopkins or in Leesville, but
I haven't been there enough to know.
I think, a lot of people, if I had to grocery shopping, went into Kankakee or into Moments, more likely Moments in many cases.
Probably.
But there were obviously, as there is in every neighborhood, taverns.
Yes.
And there were subsistence farming by a lot of the people who were there.
Mm-hmm.
But there were and other institutions, churches. There are a number of churches there, including an historic Catholic mission there, which is now fairly quiet. They have a visiting priest who comes in periodically.
It's Sacred Heart, right?
Sacred Heart.
Yeah.
At one time, there were several nuns that lived in a house there, but I believe they have, because of declining numbers in their own organizations, they're no longer there. The few that were there have moved to other locations.
There's a very, or there was, maybe still is, like a well-known summer Bible camp out in Pembroke as well.
I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe the same place that recently bought the former Roma Park grade school. And I can't think of the name now, but they were out there for many years. And I think maybe I've expanded to that.
Okay.
There also are several, Black Oak Farm, I think is the name of it. I can't think of much precisely where it is, but I believe that's an innovative farming operation that has attracted a lot of attention.
And they're finally getting natural gas out there.
Yeah, this last year, they were after many years of not having to do bottled gas or wood fires or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think there's probably been at least some improvement in the road situation.
I would hope so. Yeah. It seemed like when because I did have Mayor Hodge from Hopkins Park. He was, I guess it's almost been, it wasn't 2023. I think it was 2022. And he was talking about the, making the roads better and things like that.
Yeah.
So
the huge problem there, of course, is there's no tax base. You don't have
there's not enough business
or industry where are providing the tax money that's needed to build roads and things.
Right.
Schools are interesting though. Up until I think note to myself here. Yeah, until 1960, a new 22-room elementary school was built and opened in Pembroke, and it replaced 6 one-room or small schoolhouses. The Doney, Fairmore, Goben, North Hopkins Park, and the Pembroke Township Hall had previously been the education of the district of, I think it's Elementary School District 259, I think. And a man named Lorenzo Smith was the first black teacher in Pembroke Township. He came in after service in he was born down south somewhere, but after World War II, where he had been in the military, he in this area and became a teacher, I think at the Goben School, but I'm not sure which. And eventually became the superintendent of schools. And today there's, of course, a school named after him.
Right. Yep. We hear it all the time.
That's right. Yeah. And that's strictly an elementary school. But there was talk at one time, of course, of trying to expand that district to include a high school.
Mm-hmm.
But that never seemed to get off the ground. So now ever since then, the graduates from the Pembroke elementary schools go to St. Anne High School.
Yes.
In 2004, Illinois State Senator Mr. Barack Obama visited the Kankakee area. and who spoke at the Morning Star Baptist Church in Kankakee. And actually, I've had a lot of requests on that church to do research. He later participated in a meeting held at the Church of the Cross in Hopkins Park and toured mobile homes in the area. We have a picture of him on this City newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
We have a copy of it at the museum. So a famous later president came to our area.
I mean, specifically to Pembroke, Hopkins Park. I know Kankakee auditor Jake Lee, who is, I think, the first county or the first African American auditor
in an elected county office.
An elected county office, county-wide.
Yes.
He grew up in Pembroke, Hopkins Park. Jake did. You can actually listen to an episode I did with him 2 or 3 years ago, early on, if people want to listen to that. So I think of him when I think of Hopkins Park and Pembroke.
But please come to the museum.
Yes.
And look at our exhibit and then go through our materials. And
we'll try to answer any questions that people raise.
Absolutely. And the exhibit is awesome. It was done several years ago and just looks awesome. So.
And hopefully, this could bring more information to light too for any future exhibits at the museum, because I mean, I think there's still so many things we're finding out about the certain population demographics, races in the county. So, hopefully this kind of helps people step forward if they've got something that's of value.
All the time we get inquiries, somebody saying, we just bought this old house and when we were cleaning out stuff in the attic, we found such and such. And would you like to have a copy of it, or would you like it? And often we're able to say yes. Sometimes we can't say yes because we have 25 of them of that particular book or something already, or we have no space for it.
Yeah, that too. KankakeeCountyMuseum.com. You can go there, follow on social media, Instagram, Facebook, both at Kankakee County Museum. And thank you, Jory and Jack, as always, for stopping by.
It is, as always, our pleasure. Thank you, Jake.
You're very welcome. That concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake LaMore. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Kankakee Podcast. Shout out to Teague Dreenan for supporting the show each month through Patreon. If you want your name announced on a future episode, you can sign up at patreon.com/Kankakee Podcast. Special thanks to our sponsors, Chicago Dough Company, Noble Dairy Queen Stores, Frank's Appliance Center and Sleep Source, King Music, Little Me Studio, D. Westfall Jewelers, and Edward Jones Financial Advisor Adam Elroy. Kankakee Podcast is produced by the fine team at Pathfinder, a full-service marketing agency in downtown Kankakee. You can learn more at yourpathfinder.io. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.
This river